a couple times this afternoon and it's not worked out. I guess it's a learning process, but we're getting the bugs worked out. So what I'm doing right now is I'm making rattles. Since this particular baby shower is for a little girl, a princess, and we are using pink and white and silver, I thought that would be kind of neat, instead of doing the traditional rattle, to do the magic wand and have that serve as our rattle. So I chose the little star magic wand that I have here. I'm going to be doing 6 of these, so I'm going to be making 3 pink and 3 white. I want to add a little bit of dimension to it, so I'm going to do this in sections. I'm doing the main part of the handle and then the bottom part, and then I'll come back and do this part and do the star. I'm going to ultimately end up painting probably these 2 sections with the TMP silver to give them some sheen, and then I'll put an alternating color bow. So where this is white, this will have a little pink bow. I think I got a little too much icing there, so I'm just going to straighten that up. I'm working with Franken frosting today, which is actually the slang name for Sweet Hope icing. If you Google it, you'll find it. The Franken frosting is also another term for it. It's a nice mixture of royal icing and glaze, and it's really nice to work with. It crusts really easily, and I've had some really good success with it. You can make it in, well, actually I make it in a double batch. I was going to say you can make it in half batches. The normal recipe calls for 1 pound of white sugar for the glaze and 1 pound for the royal icing. I use the 2 pounds in both and then mix them together. I have found in my cookie decorating adventures that there's no such thing as too much icing. And so I like to make the larger batch, because then that way I always have some. Got a little crooked there, so I'm pushing him back into where I want him. Earlier I did baby bibs and crowns. When the customer said to me that they were expecting a princess, I had just gotten some fondant molds. I'm kind of new to working with fondant, but I had just gotten some fondant molds that were for, I guess, a Cinderella type thing, where they had a horse and buggy and they had a carriage and they had these cute little castles, and I thought that would be really perfect. Okay, so moving on to my pink. I'm using tipless bags. I like tipless bags. The reason that I like them is because you can put just a tiny little bit of pressure and get the icing to come out, and then you can increase your pressure and get a little bigger flow. I do also like tips for different things, particularly detail work. And so then I will drop my tipless bag into a tipped bag, which makes a lot less mess cleanup. Saves you from having to make another bag with the same color that you're going to use. And it also is super handy, especially if you need several different tips or different sizes of tips or different styles of tips with the same color. So as I'm talking to you guys, I clearly can't count. He should have been pink. So this is the white one that I just did. So I'm using my Boo Boo stick and eradicating the white icing. So my plan is to go over the white, or I'll do these stars and then this other thing in white, this other section of the handle. And then when that's dry, I will go over it with the TMP Silver. I have been using vodka, but had heard a lot of people comment that they were getting shinier looks to their gold and to their lusters with higher content, alcohol content products such as Everclear grain alcohol, if that's available to you guys. And I decided to get some to try it, and it makes a big difference. The luster is, at least as far as what I can tell, dramatically different. So I definitely would recommend that. So this will be my last one. I thought this time also that I would do smaller videos so that you guys could watch little snippets instead of spending an hour long watching me decorate cookies. Those of us that enjoy decorating cookies can spend hours watching somebody else decorate cookies, but those of you that are just mildly interested probably don't want to see that kind of nonsense. I don't think that people realize that it is very time consuming. There is a lot of wait time in waiting for step A to dry before you can go on to step B. Okay, so that'll be the last of my magic wands. So for this little one, I'm only doing a couple of these. I'm going to put in Cinderella's Castle. And again, this is a fondant mold that I molded just with a white fondant and then painted with the TMP. One thing that I did do is after I unmolded it, I added just a little tiny dab of royal icing to the parchment paper so that it stayed still while I was brushing it with the TMP and I didn't have to chase it all over the place. My plan for this is that I want to just do a flood of the cookie. I'm going to do 2 of these pink with white dots and 2 of these white with pink dots, kind of doing a polka dotted kind of thing, so that I'm mixing the colors in. And then I want to drop this into the wet so that it sinks just a tiny little bit and is recessed. And then I'm going to go around the outside with a silver bead, but I'm going to do that, I believe, after the fact, not do it while the flood is going on. So we're going to be doing a little wet on wet technique with the icing. So I'm going to just start with the pink. You'll notice that I wasn't super crazy particular with that. I have found for me that I can be a little quicker scribing to the edge and getting the icing exactly where I want it than spending extra minutes to be super careful. Sometimes, and I've seen other cookiers that work the other way, where they'll spend a couple minutes outlining it perfectly. If you're doing a cookie that needs to be outlined, then absolutely you've got to do that. But I actually even timed myself on a couple cookies a while back just to see if there was a difference, and I ended up being significantly faster doing a sloppier outline and then scribing myself to the edge. The other benefit, at least that I've found for me, is that if my icing consistency isn't exactly dead on, by scribing it to the edge, I have that little bit of slack where it's not going to fall off. I typically like a pretty full icing cookie, but I'm not sure. And I flooded this fairly full, but I'm not sure how much it's going to move when I put the castle in. So right now I'm just popping air bubbles. I just made the icing today. I normally like to make it the night before. Okay, here goes. I'm going to try to get it right about in the middle and flop it in. Push down on it just a little bit so that it's just slightly recessed. Look for anything that's coming off the edge. I don't see anything, so we're good. I probably should have done my polka dots before, but I was talking to you guys thinking about that castle falling off and not paying attention to what I was doing. But that's alright, we'll add the polka dots now. I haven't really worked all the bugs out of my wet on wet technique. I don't know that if I'm just not fast enough or what the deal is, but I get these little places that seem to me almost like little pimples where the icing just hasn't completely absorbed. And I think really what that is that the icing has actually started to crust over, and so it's not allowing my dots to sink. And so what I have found is that if I take my scribe and poke them just a little tiny bit into the icing underneath, it kind of pops the pimple and allows it to sink in. And you see these are all laying down really nicely. You could, I suppose, if you wanted to leave it and let it crust like that, there wouldn't necessarily be anything wrong with that. It would add a little dimension to it. But my goal for these is that I wanted the polka dots to be just an afterthought. So I really wanted them to be smooth inside the cookie, and I think we've accomplished that. So we'll do one more pink. have to keep announcing it so I don't forget. So this is what I was explaining earlier about the tipless bags. Do you see that I can make a fairly fine line with just a small amount of pressure? And then I really squeeze and get a much thicker flow. I want to be careful that I don't overfill the cookie in this circumstance because I'm going to be adding the dots on top of it. This time I'll do them before. So I am using a little less icing than what I would normally use to get this cookie flooded. When you scribe in a clockwise motion, or at least I do. That's what works for me. I'll give this a little bounce. Okay, so now I'm coming back with my white this time. You could do random dots. I find that my random ends up not being random, so it's better if I go at it with a pattern. Got one that's slightly undotted, but I think that'll be okay. I'll just smooth that in. And then I'm just going back and lightly popping those ones that just aren't settled in. Okay, so now that I have those done, I'm going to drop in my castle. Just give it a little push to sink it in there a little bit. Doesn't look like I'm running off the edge anywhere. Okay, so now we're going white. I just started working with fondant. It's been interesting. Vegetable shortening and cornstarch are definitely your friend. You want to cornstarch up your molds. That really helps prevent it from sticking. You want to massage your fondant until it's really nice and smooth. And a little cornstarch. Fondant, when you start messing with it, goes through a little funky stage, and then it gets a little sticky. And if you put a little vegetable shortening or Crisco on your fingers and keep working with it, the stickiness then kind of goes away and it becomes really smooth. And you almost have to do it to feel it, to know when it makes that transition, but you'll definitely feel it. And it doesn't take long, just a few seconds, maybe a good 30 seconds or so. And then it's ready to stuff in the mold. You really want to stuff it tight so that you get nice good details. Then you can go over it depending on how big your item is with a rolling pin. I used a stencil spatula, a little stencil spatula, to smush it in there really tight. And then I used that same stencil spatula to pull off the excess of the fondant. You want that back to be as flat as it can be so that it lays down wherever you're putting it. Got a couple little places here that look a little thin, but since we're going to be adding the polka dots, I think that they'll be okay. Another thing that helped me with the fondant is that I stuck it in the refrigerator. You could also stick it in the freezer to really let it set up good, and no more than 5 minutes. And that really helped it maintain the detail when you pop it out of the mold. So I'm just going back and nudging the little polka dots that didn't lay flat. Okay, I think that's everybody. So I'm dropping in the castle. Okay, last one. The turntable is super handy. You don't have to stick your fingers on the cookie to move it. And you're able to rotate it around. I really think that it helps to speed up the process. Plus I like that it's slightly elevated. You could also stick it on a paper towel or a napkin and just rotate your napkin. That would work. Okay, so I'm just going to pop these couple to get them to lay flat. Flop in my last castle. Okay, so that's all 4 of those. The next up is the onesie, which since it's a little girl, I'm going to do it a little fancy. I like the little crossover here in front, so I'm going to do that. I thought about making a little waistline, but I don't know if I'm a fan of that or not. I'll have to see once I get it out. But more importantly is I have these little fondant things that I want to put on the onesie, so I'm going to have to see how that fits in there. So if I do my little crossover about like so, and do my little waistline about like that, it's only going to give me a little bit of room. But if I only do the crossover, then I have a little more room. But I could lower that a little bit. I don't know, that might work. So my plan is to come back with a crossover and just make it and add a little bit, like I'm adding a ruffle or something to it. So I'm just going to do that with a single line. So I just want to completely flood this. So I'm doing 6 of these. Same deal. I'm going to do 3 pink, 3 white. And then I'm going to flop my fondant piece in the middle of it. And that'll also help me determine where my line needs to go whenever I'm ready to do the detailing. I am going to do some wet on wet on this, so I want to be careful that I don't overfill it. Anytime that you get icing that you think is too close to the edge, just take your scribe and squish it back into the middle of the cookie. Got a little bit of icing there in the armpit. And just as I'm doing that, I'm trying to use consistent sized dots, but the coloring on it is so subtle that you're not going to notice if one's a tiny bit bigger than the other. Okay, so keeping in mind that my line is going to come from the shoulder down underneath the armpit, and I want this to be about the middle. So that isn't exactly the middle. It's just a little lower. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these. I'm going to do 3 pink, 3 white. That'll be it for this video, and then I will catch you guys when I start the strollers. Thanks for watching.